Okay. So today I'm sitting down with Tiffany Gardhouse. She is a health, wellness, and nutrition coach, as well as a yoga teacher, a business owner, a mom, and of course, a wife, amongst many other titles. But at the end of the day, she is so passionate about yoga, meditation, and mindful eating, and it comes across in all of the work that she does. And I'm super grateful to have been connected with Tiffany. We kind of were introduced through a mutual friend of ours who owns a yoga studio, Anahat from the Heart. Our friend's name is Sarah, and so I'm grateful for that connection there. And I'm excited to be sitting down with you today, just because the more I look into your work, I was doing a bunch of diving into the back end of your website, looking at your recipes. And the more I read, the more I want to learn from you. So I'm super excited for the opportunity to sit down with you today. And so just to start, I so appreciate you being here. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to sit down and chat with me.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here too.
Oh, of course. So I briefly read on the website, of course, that you kind of went from the corporate life of working the 9 to 5, the hustle and bustle, which I'm sure so many listeners can relate to, and are maybe still in that or have since parted ways with that lifestyle. But what did that look like for you, and how did you go from that to where you are today?
So I actually do have a bit of a disclaimer to make. I am still working my corporate job alongside everything else that I do.
Oh, wow.
And so I choose, there's been many opportunities that I've had to explore other avenues, but I've chosen to stay with this path because I feel like it gives me that extra level of relatability with the clients and the people that I'm working with, because I know what it's like to want to maintain health and wellness and mindfulness and have a stressful job with deadlines and meetings and emails and a busy family. So my journey has been a big roller coaster of figuring it all out. And I think that just really helps me work with everybody. Everybody is juggling so much, and so I've learned so much about myself, and I'm excited to share that with everyone.
Oh, that's amazing. And I love that disclaimer. I think that's so fitting. And I think the accessibility portion of that is huge, because there's so many people that, maybe love their full-time job still, or even if they don't, maybe they do love it and they want to explore other things. And it just shows that you can absolutely do both. It's not a black and white situation that I think we often go into it with. It's like you kind of have to pick one or the other, when, you can still very much do both. And I love that so much, in that so many people can relate to that. And I think that's just a really cool thing. And for people that are maybe in a position where they can't necessarily leave their job, it's what pays the bills. So it's just nice to see that it's not such a black and white thing, that you really can do both. So I think that's really quite amazing that you're able to do both. And all the work that you're doing, it looks like you put so much time and energy into it. So kudos to you for being able to do that, do the hustle, do the side time hustle too, as well as be a wife and a mom, because of course those are also full-time jobs. So I commend you for being able to juggle all those things and do it with such eloquent passion. So I definitely commend you for that.
Thank you. It's taken setting a lot of healthy boundaries for myself. I have very set routines that I stick to make sure that I get up at the same time every day. I have a beautiful morning routine, a dinacharya that I practice to help get me into that mindset. And then it helps me show up as a better mom, a better wife, a more calm employee.
Absolutely. And did it take getting into a situation that was basically, shit was hitting the fan for you to set those boundaries, or did the boundaries happen right away for you? Did you recognize that need right away, or?
No, I definitely hit a wall. So I'd say my journey began in 2005 when I had my first anxiety attack, and I didn't know what that was. I thought I was dying. I didn't understand why I couldn't breathe. I wasn't sleeping. I was just not feeling great at all. I didn't feel good in my own skin. And I actually had a healthcare practitioner at the time recommend yoga. And I thought, well, that's weird. You're telling me to go to a yoga class? I think I'm dying here. And you're telling me to try yoga? But I went, and instantly I was hooked because I felt so great. And I kept going back. I kept going back. And, fast forward several years of a regular yoga practice, I learned that I wasn't listening to my body. I was experiencing stress. I was, shoving it all down and, can't get sick. You can't slow down. You can't take a rest. You must work all the time. And I shoved that down. So yeah, I had horrible, debilitating anxiety, and I actually have had shingles 3 times.
Oh,
So my body screamed at me, listen to me, this is what you need. And I kept shoving it down.
it's so funny. I've often thought that too. Like for most people, I think we have a very similar path in that it takes us coming to a practice like yoga or meditation or whatever that practice looks like for us to realize that our body is so communicative with us. We just don't pay attention to it most of the time. And it sounds like you experience that too, but it's so funny. It's like we get those subtle reminders, those little inklings to make us dig a little deeper. But then, if we continue to not listen and explore what those notions mean, and dig a little deeper, it takes getting hit with something like shingles or something that really stops us dead in our tracks for us to actually pay attention to it, which at the end of the day it's all part of the journey. And I think there's so many beautiful learning opportunities between the time that I guess all the way from when we're young, right, to the point that maybe we're hit with this knowing of, hey, our body's always talking to us, so I think that's such an incredible point. And I think that's so invaluable. And for anybody listening, that's, if you ever feel it's funny, and everyone experiences it so different, right? I find for you, it sounds like the anxiety piece, that was a big one. And I know for so many others, it's that too, or maybe it's, just an off feeling in your stomach, or it's maybe, chronic headaches, or whatever it appears to be. It's just that inquiry to dig deeper. So I think that's such an important point. So, so from the point that you actually started the yoga classes, what did that journey look like for you to get kind of from that point to then want to become a teacher yourself?
I met some beautiful teachers along the way, and one of them was such an inspiration to me. She also worked actually in the same workplace as myself, which I didn't realize till afterwards. And she kept saying to me, "You have to do this. You have to do this." And I dug a little bit deeper, and I love teaching. It's something that I've always wanted to teach, but I just wasn't sure what I could teach to the world. And I thought, you know what, maybe this is it. Maybe yoga is it. And so I did my 200 hour. I'm currently going for my 300 hour because I've learned so much about not only how I can help other people, but myself as a teacher. And so I signed up to do the yoga teacher training, and I was submersed. We did, weekend long, just yoga, just meditation, just connecting to spirituality, connecting to ourselves. And that was actually one of the first times that I had really meditated. And I learned so much about myself and what it's like to slow down, to not be racing to 50 different things at the same time. And just how my body responded to that was forever life changing.
Oh, that's amazing. And are you doing the 300 hour at the same place you would have done your 200, or did you go to a different place, or?
So I've actually gone to a different place. The place that I did my 200 hour is no longer, it was Buddha Rider in Collingwood. And
Okay.
so I'm working one-on-one with a private mentor who is also very passionate about Ayurveda. And that's why I was drawn to her. And so I'm working one-on-one with her, and we're doing the 300 hour together.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't realize there was opportunity to do that on a one-to-one basis. That's really, really cool. I love that. And especially now, would it be virtually as well, or would it be something that you have to attend in person?
It's all virtual.
Oh, that's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing. Well, kudos to you for going back. I ended up only doing my 200. I've been thinking about my 300 for so long now, but it's one of those things that I find, and you can probably speak to this too, that I found when I went to my yoga teacher training, as much as, I think everyone, I went into it thinking everyone within that group wanted to be a yoga teacher, but more commonly than not, people just went in for self-growth and development, which I found so fascinating. And by the end of it, though, I wasn't surprised. I've said this so many times that yoga has changed my life, as it sounds like it's also changed yours. And going through those trainings, it's so much more than just a physical practice. If anyone thinks that that's all it is, it's so much more than that. Like you said, the spiritual piece is huge. Philosophy is also a big part of it. So there's just so much there. And same to Ayurveda as well. That was something that I didn't get to learn too much about in my 200 hour, but I'm very drawn to as well. So for anyone listening that doesn't know what Ayurveda is, can you give us a little rundown on what that is?
Yeah, so it's actually a 5,000-year-old sister science to yoga that is from ancient India. It's basically looking at each of us individual and connecting us back to our nature, our natural elements. It kind of goes a little bit different from, the Western philosophy. And I think that's why I was really drawn to it, because not only is it holistic, but it's just a different way of looking at how we can, live on a day-to-day basis to prevent sicknesses, to prevent diseases, and to also help cure anything that we have going on with ourselves right now. So basically, it's every one of us is born with a natural, it's called dosha. It's our natural element. And the elements are based out of ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And all of us have all of these elements within us, just in different recipes. So some of us have more air and ether, some of us have more earth and water, some of us have more fire and water, but we all have all of the elements. And what's really cool about this is that we can be our own unique selves with these elements, because each element brings about its own characteristics and its own qualities, but also it brings about its own challenges, sicknesses, and imbalances. And so when we learn our dosha, our unique makeup, we can live to our fullest potential and really hone in on our strengths. And we can also help cure anything that we might have going on, any sicknesses or any imbalances.
I love that. And I love to hear the way that you describe the doshas, because often I've heard, we're either one or the other, or we're tridoshic, meaning we're all of them. So I've also read, but I love the way that you explain it, that we're all a combination of all of them. We're just a different recipe, a different makeup, different amounts of certain things, which I think speaks to how multidimensional we are as beings, and that we're not just one thing. And so I think that's definitely so relative, and it really describes such a great approach to healing on a very multidimensional level as well. In that, two people can come with the same symptom set to want to solve a problem, but based on their constitution and their dosha recipe, more or less, the approach might be a little bit different, which is, in tune that much more effective out of it, So I think that's
Absolutely.
really fantastic. And how do you incorporate Ayurveda into your practice right now? Is it a big part of what you do?
Absolutely. So I do encourage everybody to discover what their dosha is. So the three doshas are Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. So Vata is your air, your ether. So doesn't mean these people don't have the other elements, they just predominantly have the air and the ether. And then you have your Pitta. So your Pitta is your fire with a bit of water. And then your kapha. And I say kapha, but it could also be pronounced kapha because it's spelled Kapha. So these are your earth and your water doshas. And so I encourage everybody to you can take a free dosha quiz. There's tons of them online. Take the free dosha quiz and discover where you have your strengths and what your natural prakruti is, your natural element. And then from there, you can really learn a lot about yourself. So for example, somebody with a lot of air and ether, the vatas, they are very creative people. They love, change. They actually are very adaptable. They are great conversationalists. They have tons of energy. Vatas are the life of the party. If you're having a party, you want to invite a vata because they are just going to circle around like a social little butterfly, and everybody's just going to have a great time talking to them. And then you have your pitta. So your pitta, these are your fire and your water. So pittas are very smart. They can take in information quickly. They process things really well. They're organized. These are your list makers. They're motivated and they are unstoppable. They have good strategizing. Pittas have a lot of really good work ethic. They also burn the candle at both ends. And as I'm sure you can tell from my story earlier, I am very much pitta.
I was going to guess that, and I'm vata. So I was going to ask you to unpack each of them, explaining that I was that one. So thank you for going into those. But and sorry, I'll let you continue to kapha now as well.
Yeah, so then your kaphas, so they are steady, solid. So they're made of earth and water. So if you think about kind of what happens when you mix earth and water together, they're, they're thick, they're heavy, they can be stubborn. They're very dependable. They're also very compassionate. So your kaphas, it's good to have a kapha friend if you're ever sick, because they're the ones that are going to be checking in on you every day and leaving chicken noodle soup at your door. So kaphas are very loving and nurturing people. And so I really encourage everybody to discover what their dosha is so that they can find their strengths. And also so that we can learn what the common imbalances are when you might be predominantly, so you're vata, so you're predominantly vata. So it's great to learn what is a common imbalance for you as vata. Some of the imbalances that you might experience would be anxiety, right? Because if you think about it, you have a lot of air and ether moving through your body. Headaches and migraines are very common for vatas. Joint pain, cracking joints actually. Gas and bloating, right? Because that's air in the body. Constipation actually too. Dry skin, dry hair. Those are all very common for vatas. But even a pitta or a kapha can have a vata imbalance. So it's good to learn what the imbalances are for these doshas as well, because that all is going to help us when we sit down and figure out how we can bring balance in.
And so how does that approach go towards the actual diet as well? So I'm curious to know, because as soon as you said that, I was thinking, okay, because I'm so much air, I find typically, as soon as you said that, I thought it makes sense that grounding foods like, our root vegetables and things like that, I find just sit with me so well. Would that speak to along those same lines of that kind of brings me back into balance if I eat those foods that are maybe more of what I would relate to kapha in the constitution?
Absolutely. So for the mindful eating aspect, I like to look at how we prepare the food. So if somebody is coming to me and they're predominantly vata and they're experiencing a lot of high vata elements, I would probably ask them to sit down and eat something that is heavy and moist. So a stew, a soup, things that are not pureed, because if you think about, a smoothie, even like a soup or smoothie bowl that you're pureeing up, you're adding air and you're mixing and chopping that all up. So that's putting energy into your food. So you want something, leave the big chunks in your soup, sit down and eat that. You want, something that's going to be grounding, like a heavier grain, a bean, things like that, that are going to really help you feel grounded and connected to more of your earth element.
That makes sense too. And then even though our constitution, that's a great question actually as well. Do our constitutions change, or can they change throughout the course of our life, or do they stay the same from inception to the end of our time here?
Your constitution is actually designed at the time of conception.
Okay.
So that is your natural element. But what happens is life. Life comes in and just throws us off balance. So a lot of times we might not have a hard time discovering what our actual dosha is when we're adults trying to figure it out. We have to really go back to think of how we were as a child.
Right.
A lot of our physical features can determine what our dosha is as well. Like the texture of our hair, our eyes, even the size of our lips. Kappas tend to be more I think as kids, we probably refer to it as we're just big boned.
Yeah.
But kappas do tend to be a little bit thicker, where vatas tend to be very slight and lean, and pittas tend to be somewhere in between, just more of a muscular structure. And so even just looking at, how we've been most of our lives with the shape of our body and texture of our hair and the texture of our skin, we can really determine what our actual constitution is.
That's incredible. And so with that too, since our constitution then doesn't change throughout the seasons, even though we kind of certain things sit with us a little bit better than they would for different constitutions, as we move through the seasons, would those things change as well?
Right. So just like we have our own unique dosha, each season has its own unique dosha.
Ooh, let's unpack
And yeah, I feel like, so I'm actually in the process of writing a cookbook that is going to talk about eating seasonally, with the Ayurvedic concept. So I could probably talk to you about this for the next 12 days. So I'll try to go.
I'm all ears.
So if you look at the 4 seasons, you have winter, and I'll say winter because it's winter right now and it's a blustery winter day. It's the perfect day to look outside and go, this is a vata day. Winter is air, it's moving, it's dry, it's constantly changing. Just the snow and everything like that is very vata.
Right.
And then you go into spring. So spring, you have more of a kapha. It's thawing. It's the water mixed with the earth. Things are still a little bit stagnant. They're still a little bit heavy. The earth is still a little frozen, but nothing is really moving in the springtime. And then you have summer. So summer is your pitta. It's hot, it's intense, it's heat, get sunburns. We have, all that hot fire. So that's your pitta. And then fall, I like to think of fall as a mix between vata and pitta because it's still hot, but it's very mobile. It's very changing. The leaves are falling, there's gusts of wind, but we do still have those hot and cold days that we're living with. So each season has its own dosha, just like we do, right? Because we're from nature, just like the seasons. So eating seasonally, I like to look at not just the way that, what vegetables grow in that season, but also how can we eat to balance those elements. And for the most part, we already do. Because if you think about what grows in that time, so if we look at summer, what's growing in the summer is exactly what our body needs at that time to cool that pitta heat. And same with the spring. So in the spring, we've got, asparagus is growing and spring onions and, all those great things that are local peas. Those are all great things that will help to give a little bit of life and a little bit of a pick-me-up to our kapha time.
That makes so much sense. And I think that ties back to, I've always thought, the most nutrient dense foods are the ones that are growing around us in any given season, which speaks to how they feel so good when we eat them if we actually fall in suit with what is actually growing in our local area within any given season. So that makes so much sense. And I think that's just a great point. So no matter our constitution, just finding that balance with what sits well for us and then what works within that given season that we're in is kind of a good way to eat throughout the year, it sounds like. Is that safe to say?
Yes, I definitely think that's safe to say. So there's a little bit more to it. So in Ayurveda, there are 6 tastes. So all of our foods fall into these 6 tastes. And there's 3 that we're all very familiar with. So you have your sweet, your sour, and your salty. Those everybody, knows about. But then you also have your pungent, your bitter, and your astringent. And so just like we are from nature and the seasons are from nature, guess what? These tastes are also from nature. So they are also made with different natural elements. So if we look at sweet, sweet is made of earth and water.
Right.
So it's going to be very grounding. It's going to, it's got the earth and the water in it that's going to ground a vata, and it's got the water and the earth in it that's going to cool a pitta. But it could actually increase a kapha because it's made of earth and water, if that makes sense.
It totally does.
And your sweets, it's not a bowl of ice cream. I'm sorry. When I say sweet, I mean grains, dairy products, sweet fruits and berries. Coconut oil would be considered a sweet. So these are the things that you would go for if you're wanting to decrease vata, decrease pitta. Okay. And so these are the things that you would eat in the summer, right? Because it's going to be very cooling to the body.
That makes sense. And can we unpack those other 3 flavors? Because I feel like some people might not necessarily know what those 3 flavors indicate, because it's not something that is constant lingo within our current norm. So we have astringent, pungent, and bitter. So can we kind of unpack what those are and what those tastes might elicit when we eat foods that are one of those 3?
Absolutely. So your pungent, these are your spices. So this is the hot, spicy foods. So as you can imagine, it's going to increase a pitta, right? Because it's hot and spicy. Pungent, the natural element that goes with pungent is fire and air. So they could also increase a vata as well, but they're going to be very good for a kapha, right? Because kaphas are stagnant. So they need that heat, that air to come in and to give them a little bit of life. And so this is good to eat these foods in the springtime. So black pepper would be one, chili peppers, anything hot. Horseradish is another, which actually I believe, and I think you probably know this more than I would, I think horseradish is available in the spring, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So fitting with the seasonal timing of that.
Right. And then you have your bitter. So bitter is made of air and earth. It is very good for a kapha, even though it has air in it. It's one of those that are, sorry, I was wrong. Sorry, it's air and ether. I'm sorry. It's made of air and ether. So it's very good for the kapha, decreasing the kapha. Bitters are, your green leafy vegetables, your chard, your kale, spinach is another one. It's just very, very good for cleansing the body. So it's cooling for a pitta, and helps to cleanse the liver, cleanses the blood. It helps with digestion. It's just, bitters are very great. It actually helps take water out of the body.
Right.
It can be very increasing to a vata. Another bitter that we all probably know and consume every single day is coffee. So coffee is known as a bitter. And it's very increasing to a vata. So if you can imagine, it's a windy, wintry day. We have a lot of vata in us. Maybe we're having headaches. Maybe we're having constipation. Our minds are very scattered and we're all over the place. And then we're drinking a ton of coffee. You could probably see how this wouldn't be very calming to our body.
Absolutely. How true is that? And I think hearing about all this, it just makes me think, I wish this stuff was taught in schools. I feel like if we had all this information when we're young, I feel like we'd have so many more tools in our toolkit as far as, how to move through and navigate a world that we now live in, where we can basically get our hands on any type of food that we want to, since, we have so much, global interaction with that. And it's, the world is our oyster with what we can actually eat. There's ethnic food aisles, and we can just dabble in so many different culinary worlds now. But I think if we know this so young, I think it just gives us a great navigational tool to move through and know what's really good for our bodies. And I know you mentioned so often, eat the way you want to feel. And I think that is so great. And can we unpack that a little bit? And I'm also so curious, since of course you have kids of your own, and knowing everything that you know, is this something that you're utilizing in your household with? I'm assuming once you learn it, it's not like you can unlearn it and not want to practice it. So maybe a silly question, but how do you find it comes into play with your kids? I think you have 3 boys. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
So how receptive are they to eating under Ayurvedic terms?
Well, that is the $1 million question. So they are teenagers now and know everything. So mom knows nothing when you're a teenager. But the slogan, so you'll actually see that slogan, eat the way you want to feel, right on my website. And I work with a mentor, and she's like, be careful with that slogan because it could mean a lot of different things. And that's what I love about it, I think, is because it can mean so much, but it really comes back to looking at the foods and the tastes. So the 6 tastes, and how we can balance ourselves with those tastes and our doshas and our season. So there's an expression in Ayurveda called let food be medicine and medicine be food. And so when we learn that the foods that we have in our own kitchen, we probably have everything that we need in our kitchen right now to help us with any imbalance that we're experiencing, anything that we have going on. And so what's great about that is we can listen to our body. So it starts with that. First, we listen to our body, and then we ask ourselves, well, what do I want to gain from this? What am I hoping to accomplish? How do I want to feel? And then we can build a meal once we know, the dosha, and we know the 6 tastes. And ultimately too, you want all 6 tastes in every single meal that you eat, because you're going to feel satisfied after you eat it. But sometimes you want more sweet and salty, or more pungent and astringent. So knowing that, you can build a meal that is going to help you achieve the balance that you're looking for. And so that's where that came from. Eat the way you want to feel.
I love that. And I love that it really puts us in the mindset of building a relationship with our food and being more intuitive about the way that we eat. Because I think that's a huge portion of all this too, is just being intuitive with what we need going into eating, whether it be a snack or a meal or whatever it is, just really going into that with a mindfulness approach, which of course is, I know, something that you're very passionate about too. So I feel like it rewires us to think about those things in ways that we might not have before. So even on a very, very basic level, and maybe this is how you kind of come across with your kids in that way. It's just on a very similar notion, and maybe it doesn't work right now. Again, they're teenagers, but even planting the seed now, it'll repay them in the future of mentioning these things now, which actually I saw that on your website too. I was looking at your recipes, and the celery dill soup, I think it sounded phenomenal. But it had said in there, basically, it's always thinking about the future, basically, and thinking ahead and being intuitive in that way. And I think it's just an easy approach, again, going back to kids and the way that they eat. I find that I don't know, maybe saying less is more, really, but if you can just plant those small seeds, it's something that they can come back to later. And it, even if they don't want to think about it, I'm sure it's now ingrained in them to think about how they want to feel before they eat. And have you seen a change in them as you started to learn this yourself and kind of share this stuff with them?
Absolutely. So we do have meal practices that we do. So oftentimes, and my husband is also really guilty of this, we serve the meal and we sit down, and we're very big on there's no distraction. So no television, no radio. We are just with each other at the table. We all come to the table together. But sometimes what I was noticing before I learned about mindful eating was as soon as the food would be in front of us, the shoveling of the food into the mouth would start. And, maybe we would use coming to the dinner as an opportunity to bring up, why did you not clean your room? Or I asked you to take out the garbage, or whatever it was. And so we've created some really mindful boundaries around our meals. So we sit down and the food comes in, where we put the food in front of us. And then we take 3 deep breaths and we just think about one thing about that food that we're grateful for. And my kids are very sarcastic and they love to joke. So they do sometimes make light of it. But that doesn't matter. I just want them to take those 3 deep breaths before they start eating their food. And then we have no serious, angry discussions during the meal. It is just very lighthearted. What did you do today? How was your day? We laugh. We save all the serious conversations for another time. We really want to have that be our time to be with not just our food, but with each other in a positive way.
Oh, I love that. That brings me back to, my childhood too. And that was something that was so prevalent in our day to day. We sat down and we had dinner together, and same thing, no TV, nothing like that. It was just merely conversation, and whatever came up, came up. We didn't quite do the 3 breaths, but I think that's fantastic. And I think it really brings us present within our bodies, and being yoga teachers, we know that the breath is our powerhouse. It's our superpower to hone in. But I think that's so great. And I think there's a lot of that being lost now, and maybe that's starting to change. I don't know. But my partner, Brandon, we often talk about this because we don't have kids yet, but we're planning on having some. I'm an only child. I'd have like 7 kids. I'm the only child that wants so many kids, but we constantly talk about that. And I always say to him, I want to have family dinners. I think they're so important. It's a touch point. It allows us to find common ground. It just brings you together. And it's one of those things that meals bring people together. Food brings people together. It's like, kitchen parties in the East Coast, it's such a thing in every culture. But I think that's so important. There's so many families I know that maybe would sit in front of the TV and watch, and you just lose that sense of one another because our lives are so busy, and it's just a really easy way to kind of meet your family where they're at, and everyone has to eat, so it's a really great way to get everybody together, and so I love that. I think that's so inspirational, and even if they are joking about what they're grateful for in the meal, I think that's even better. It brings light to a heavy world, and I think we need more of that. So I think that's great. Brandon is definitely the jokester out of him and I often am too serious. I get into a serious head oftentimes, but we balance each other out in that way. But so I think that's fantastic. And so I'm curious to know what brought you to Ayurveda. Was it through yoga that you found Ayurveda yourself, or was it some other avenue?
Yeah. So again, it was at a time when I was, I guess, quote unquote, a hot mess. I was juggling too many things, racing from here to there, working multiple jobs or having multiple positions. The kids were young at the time. And I had attended a workshop to learn to become a restorative yoga teacher. So certified, restorative yoga. And the teacher kept talking about Ayurveda. And at one point during the weekend long workshop, she mentioned something about food and how the food that we eat can be very balancing to ground people. And I have a lifelong love of cooking and baking. And so that really intrigued me. I thought, wait a minute, the food I eat can have something to do with me feeling grounded. So I researched as soon as I went home from that weekend. I looked for mentors and teachers and courses that I could take. And it's just totally opened my mind to everything, mindful eating and Ayurveda ever since.
And do you find it's an easy thing to learn and explore? I guess you can reach any avenue of anything over the internet these days, but what's the best way? Like, if anyone wants to know more about Ayurveda, where would you recommend them starting? What was a good jumping off point for you? Because I know it's obviously such a vast practice, or would you call it a practice? What would you consider Ayurveda? A science?
That's a great question. I think it's a little bit of both. So there is science behind it, right? There's 5,000 years of science, but it's also something that we do need to practice every day.
Yeah.
We have habits that here in the Western world we think is okay. Like we think it's okay to burn ourselves out and go to work sick and do all of these things, and it takes practice to listen to our body and to slow down and to adopt some of these more non-conventional ways of living.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
It's really great point. Yeah, it's such a it's such a combination of both. There's the science to back up everything that you feel if you actually practice Ayurveda. So it's really cool. And I think one thing that I was so curious about too is, of course, this was, the birth of Ayurveda was in India. And do you find everything that you've learned since, does it translate into our Western world? Because of course, I know our lifestyles are so different than that of maybe obviously as they are across the world, but do you find it's all relative to the day and lives that we live now?
yeah, I think one of the hardest things about Ayurveda is how simple it is. It
Oh,
is so simple, and we just tend to overcomplicate it. And I really hope I didn't scare anybody away talking about the six tastes and, seasons have doshas and all of that, because it is really very simple. Have a variety of foods in your meals, and eat foods that balance you in where you are in the season and where you are in your life. That's really it. That it doesn't have to be more complicated than that. You eat organic and local foods and unprocessed foods that nourish your soul. And yeah, that's it.
so I'm so curious. Let's take your household, for example, just to give people an example of this. So I know you mentioned you're a Pitta, and everybody else in the family, are they Pitta as well? Or are they different doshas, or they're natural, obviously, constitution anyways?
Yeah, so that is very good question. So my husband is very Vata.
Okay.
My middle son is also very Vata. My oldest son is Pitta, like me, and then
Okay.
our youngest is Kapha. So we have a nice mix of all the doshas in our house, which could also make meal planning a little bit tricky. So what we do is we like to eat based on the seasons, and then we also like to change it up with the different spices and herbs, which I know is your passion, and something that I'm learning about more, herbology and the herbs that we can add to our food, but even just the spices that we have in our kitchen. So, me and my oldest son as Pitta, we probably don't want to put a lot of chili pepper and black pepper and onion on our foods, because we have a lot of Pitta fire in us already. So we're going to look for things more like coriander and cumin, things that are going to be more cooling. We'd put cilantro on our food, or fresh basil. Where my Kapha son, he could put black pepper on everything. That's what he needs. He needs that pick me up, right? So he's going to add pepper, and he's going to look for things that are going to pick him up. He's okay to put a little bit of chili pepper and crushed red pepper flakes and all of that. Those are great for him. And then my husband and my middle son, who are Vata, they actually do well with salt, because salt is very grounding. And I know we didn't get a chance to talk about salt earlier, but it's very calming to the nervous system. And so when a Vata adds salt to their food, they're getting that calming, earthy element in what they're eating. So they can put the pink Himalayan salt on their food. And so that changes up right there. Just adding those three different types of spices can take any meal of rice and vegetables and beans and cater it to the doshas.
I love that. That just makes this so accessible to everybody, because I think there might be a lot of people listening that maybe have bigger families and similar to yours, or maybe all three of the different doshas. So it might sound like it's this overwhelming approach to making meals, but I think that's such a great point, in that we can just if we change the spices that we use, it can apply to our different doshas in that way that'll resonate best with whatever we're bringing to the table. And it's interesting too, because even without thinking, and I'll let you speak to this more, but did you find that everyone was kind of drawn to the spices they innately, that kind of balance their dosha anyways? Like, say for the vatas, did they naturally go towards salt, or was it something that you kind of had to show them the ropes with, or was that more of an intuitive reach out for?
And honestly, that depends. So I have seen my pitta son be heated and angry and fiery about something, and then reach for hot sauce and go to put it all over his food, because he's so out of balance. He's so in that like hot, fiery moment, and he's just fueling his flames. And so it takes a little bit, and we're all guilty of this. I know I've been there myself, where I've just, heartburn and indigestion and feeling hot and fiery, and then still eating all those hot foods. So sometimes when we're out of balance, our bodies doesn't really know to go, oh, okay, I better not have this. I better have the opposite of what this is. We keep going to what we know.
I love that. And it's so true. I think everyone can resonate with that. Like attracts like, when we're all fired up and wild feeling, we just want things to keep that fire going sometimes. And, if we're feeling really sad, maybe we just want to put that even sadder movie on to cry about it, So I think that's so true to everyone. We can all resonate with that. And that sometimes it just feels good to push forward the feeling that we're already living in, even if that's pushing us more out of balance. So do you have any tips or tricks for that? Because oftentimes when we're so in it, when we're so out of balance, we may not have the clarity of mind to be able to go into the kitchen and pick the best thing for us. We might just pick, the bag of chips instead, or whatever it is that speaks to us in that moment. But do you have a trick to navigate that uncharted terrain maybe?
Yeah, so just like you said, like attracts like, but opposites balance. And that's what we want to learn in Ayurveda is, again, slowing down. So I'll use the example of heartburn and indigestion. So I'm feeling heartburn and indigestion. I probably don't want to eat, Tabasco sauce or spicy sriracha mayo or whatever it is. I want to have the opposite. I want to bring in something that's going to be cooling. So adding in some cilantro, having some yogurt, whatever it might be, you want that cooling element to balance, to be the opposite.
Oh, I love that. I think that's such a great thing to think about, in that even if we don't know what that is, thinking about the opposite, maybe intuitively something will then come to mind that feels different or might feel different if we can. And is that something that you often talk about too? Is, I guess that ties back into eat the way you want to feel, but it's almost imagining yourself eating whatever that thing is and seeing how you feel, even just being in the thought with that. Is that something that you touch on at all?
That is part of the mindful eating workshops that I run, where we do meditate on not just what we want to gain from the food that's right in front of us, but what do we want to gain and how do we want this food to nourish our body? Because, oftentimes we just eat the food, or here in Western society, we are told 100 different things about food. Count your macros, watch your calories, fast, take appetite suppressants. We often come to a mindful eating workshop with a whole life of learnings that are completely different than what mindful eating is. So it's just getting back to that idea that this food is here to nourish my body. So coming into it from a place of rest and digest, letting yourself calm down. And then as you're eating it, just being more mindful about how is this food nurturing? How is this helping me now? And how is this going to help my future self? Will I be able to digest this food? Will I feel energized in a couple of hours from now? Will I still feel creative and compassionate and spontaneous and all of those amazing characteristics that I have?
I love that. I love that. And I'm so curious too. I know you had mentioned the book that you are now writing, of course, too. And I'm curious to know, just because I know we're pushing the clock for time, I'm curious to know, I meant to ask you this right when you had mentioned it, but is there anything that you learned throughout exploring the different research that you go into, of course, navigating writing a book that surprised you or took you aback? I know you mentioned it's very simple and it's an easy approach for everyone, but is there something that you could share with us that maybe is something that you might not think after everything we've talked about, that might surprise people, but in an interesting way that might invoke them to want to learn even more about Ayurveda and purchase your book when it comes out?
I think something that really surprised me is the benefits of the different herbs and spices. So just like, people say, eat kale, it has natural iron in it. Herbs and spices have a laundry list of benefits. And so what I love about putting recipes together is looking at the ingredients and then seeing what are the benefits of this. So for example, we could use, so Thai basil was a recipe that I featured on my most recent Meals and Mantras. And Thai basil has a ton of benefits. One is it helps to calm the central nervous system. So looking at that, so we're adding this in, we can eat this food and think of all the great characteristics or qualities of calming our central nervous system. And then something else that I've kind of adopted to this is putting an affirmation or a mantra to it. So I am calm and grounded. I am connecting with my natural self. I am nurturing myself, whatever that mantra is. Actually, I'm trying to think. I think it was I feel the energy of my nature, my natural self. I think that was what my mantra was on Monday with the Thai basil. And so what's great about that is we put this mantra to this food. So now we kind of have an affirmation in our head as we're eating it. And so I never in a million years thought that this is where I would go with all of this, but I'm really happy with it. So I've coined the term meals and mantras. I don't think it's mine. I do think I heard it somewhere, but I'm going to take it and run with it, because I do want to connect the healing benefits of the foods with a positive affirmation that we can say to ourselves.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. And I was going to ask you to unpack that a little bit, the meals and mantras. But I think that's so great. Again, it fosters that relationship with our food, and it just makes us more present when we're actually eating the food that we're eating. And was this something that you had started with yourself personally and found it to be super beneficial? And then, of course, naturally wanting to share? Or how did you come about this idea? Because I think it really is so fantastic for anybody listening who maybe hasn't thought of this idea before or hasn't. It's on Tiffany's website as well, which I'll link to in the show notes. But how did you get to this place yourself?
I am always looking at what is the benefit of this? How is this going to benefit me? And so I just let the pitta in me research everything until I could put the two and two together. So whatever I'm eating, I always want to know, how is this going to help me now, and how is it going to help my future self? Because we want to feel good from the foods that we eat. And so that's just kind of how that was born.
I love that. I think that's fantastic. And again, as I said, I know we're getting close to the end of our time here, but was there anything that you want to share with our listeners that we didn't touch on, or any words of inspiration for anybody that's totally new to this world of mindful eating, Ayurveda, season-led living, that's kind of maybe just dipping their toe in these new waters? Do you have any words of inspiration or anything else you want to share before we round out today's talk?
So I would say keep it simple, opposites balance, and take a look at your spice cupboard and look for, if you can even just have on hand coriander, cumin, fennel, some ginger, cinnamon, cardamom is another good one. You can just keep those spices on hand, and as you're adding them to your foods, take the time to smell them and to see how, you know, the chemical reaction that you're getting in your body as you smell it, as you cook it, and then as you sit down to eat it, that's if that's all we do, that's amazing.
I love that. And I just think in the world that we live in, when there's so many different, labels and diets and ways that different people are eating, if we can, of course there's restrictions and sensitivities and allergies. And of course we have to be mindful of those things. But I think the Ayurvedic approach to eating is such an easy way to approach food with a very almost primal understanding, and it just really makes it an easy approach. Like you said, keep it simple. So I think this is such a great, obviously, point to end off with, that it really is an accessible tool for everyone. And I think for anyone listening, definitely dive into this more. And Tiffany's work, there's so much there's such a wealth of knowledge on your website and from the work that you do. So thank you so much for sharing that with everybody. And of course, thank you so much for sitting down with me today. This has been a real pleasure. I'm looking at my list of questions. I have some questions that I wanted to ask you, and I probably didn't make it through half of them. But I love where the conversation went on its own. So maybe we'll have to do a round 2 of this. But I just want to thank you so much for sitting down with me today. I know I personally learned so much. I have so much to take away from this. And I think the same goes for all the listeners too. So I just, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Until next time, Tiffany.